find the most effective way to give feedback to students is to pose questions to them and to try and probe and deconstruct their thought process. So I might say something like, that's a really interesting idea that you've come up with there. What led to that, and what other options might you consider? Have you thought about this option, for example? So rather than giving direct, oh, that's not a great idea or that's a fantastic idea, it's more along the lines of what led you to that and what else might you have considered?
I find the most effective way to give feedback is through a sandwich comment style. So sandwich comment or sandwich feedback is a method whereby I provide the comments in different layers. So for example, if I want to critique a student's work or an assignment, sometimes we can be overly critical and just write what are the negative things and what they want to improve. But how I devise my comments is that first I say, what is the good thing they have done? What they should take forward in their next assignments or next previous work. And then at the second layer of comments is where I put those critical points where they can improve upon. And the third one, again, I come back and say, which are the areas where they can mix and create new additions.
I find the most effective way to give feedback is, obviously you don't want to talk about the person who's done it. You need to talk about the work always and objectify it like that, because especially students, I think, can be very personal about their work, and you don't want to offend people because then they get offside and it doesn't allow them to grow. So it's important to talk about the work and what it is, and I think also what you give them back when you're talking about the work does vary from student to student. Some will just need to simply be shown something inspirational, like an image or something, and they go off and they know where to take it. And others need a lot more help. They really need you to give them the first idea. And just, you need to talk to them a bit before you know where they sit in that, those two extremes of types of people. And just by talking to them, then you can understand what they might need to give them that little step up, to get their project moving forward.
The way in which I give feedback to students, I would have to say, is almost exactly the same as the way I do it within practice. There's very little difference. I mean, I think my position, I run a small architecture practice with my partner. We're co-directors. We have 3 to 4 staff. It varies a little bit, so it's not a big studio, so it's a very flat hierarchy, and the discussions that happen there are very much face-to-face and immediate. So in that sense, it's relatively similar to the studio environment. And I would just say I give feedback verbally, I give feedback often, like as much as I possibly can, and it's honest. It's always incredibly honest and straightforward and simple, And I would ask others to do the same thing to me, So then it's about a constant free flow exchange of information, and the feedback is no different from a discussion. It's, when you're talking about the weather, that's a series of feedbacks between 2 people that establish a dialogue by which they can make a judgment call or share an opinion, whatever it is.
Effective feedback is focused on the work and the actions that have been undertaken. Effective feedback, again, is emphasising progress and constructive ways forward. And effective feedback is working with those students in a way forward. It's a collaborative effort, and it's a co-learning effort and co-creative effort, much more than it ever used to be. And that creates a space where they hear you better, and the work progresses well.
I find the most effective way of giving feedback is to talk to the students, to have a conversation with them, and to hear what they have to say in response to the feedback that I have to give to them, because at the end of the day, their feedback is equally as important as the feedback that I give them.
I find the most effective way to give feedback is, basically it is the positive-negative approach. But for them to understand before I give feedback, it's not a criticism of them as a person. You know, it's that everybody has room to improve. You know, myself included, and I make this clear to students that, you know, prior to giving feedback, that we all need to. The reason we're at university is we need to learn, and we learn by, you know, sort of how, you know, by the tutors giving feedback, learning where we could improve. Even if we have done a fantastic job, there's still room for improvement.
I find the most effective way to give feedback is to start with giving praise to the whole group. And then when it comes to individual students, giving them something positive about their work. And then rather than focusing on negatives, giving them something to work towards for the next week.
I find the most effective way to give feedback is directly and consistently throughout the design studio. So, for instance, working in groups, I find it's important to go around the group and give each person feedback equally. And that's not to say it's the same feedback, but to find something positive about the student's work, and then, you know, to emphasise that at the same time as pointing out some areas which might not be successful. But it's also important in that regard to give a reason, so that it's not a subjective view of the work, but that there's an ability to substantiate maybe why that feedback has occurred. I think we all like our students to go really well in their course, but if you're seeing the possibility of a student failing, it's really important to communicate that ahead of time. I think sometimes students don't really know where they're at, or they don't listen to bad feedback. And so to be able to actually say in writing, I think that you're going to fail, often has a really good effect of having them, you know, pull their socks up and start to work really hard, because that might have financial consequences or some other things that they hadn't really thought of the possibility yet. And so early feedback and constant feedback.
I think there is a difference in how you approach the individual, and it's about understanding the needs of the individual and understanding what they need at a particular time to nurture them through the learning process. So that is a fairly marked difference to the way that I would deliver feedback in industry, where it would be fairly, it would still be constructive, but in some ways much more straightforward and much more direct in my approach to giving feedback.